If there's one time during the year when the deep and wide separation between reality and the vision of God's world is apparent, it's in the season of Advent and Christmas, especially during Advent and Christmas in the middle of war. Even the most hardened of soldiers find themselves wishing for a different way, or at least a way to break through reality to the world of peace on earth. Nowhere was this more apparent than the weeks before Christmas 1944. In the area around Belgium, Luxembourg, France, right there on the border of Germany. The men of the Third Army weren't expecting a Christmas truce like had happened in World War I, almost 20 years earlier. They knew, in this case, that the Allied troops were moving forward. They were defeating the enemy at every turn. Oddly, but no one paid attention to it, intelligence reports, such as they were, showed a significant decrease in enemy activity. The leadership said, "We got him." The unspoken cry was almost, "On to Berlin, now." Maybe there would be a ceasefire for this Christmas, and far more permanent than the one in 1914. Maybe they'll be home soon. Wouldn't that be the best way to celebrate Christmas? Edward said as he poked his fellow medic, JT, who was sitting there trying to read a magazine in the midst of all the chaos. Quiet chaos now. It was quiet. JT looked at his medical partner and said, "Yeah, sure, you betcha," in his best Minnesota accent. "And sure, Patton is going to stop cursing, but for a New Year's resolution." JT shook his head and went back to his reading. "Pessimist," mumbled Edward. "What good is it if we can't hope and dream?" It was just 2 weeks until Christmas. Actually, it was about 10 days. Company C of the division's medical battalion had been assigned to what was called the third level of care. They were at the reserve and headquarter company. They were only about 2 miles from where the headquarters itself was billeted, a good 10 miles from the front. This Company C, was the final stage on the way to an evacuation hospital and long-term critical care, maybe even back in the States. The past 2.5 weeks had gotten less and less intense. They joined the battle the beginning of November, and in the middle of November, they were part of a major thrust in the southern part of Luxembourg, Belgium, France. Now, the intensity had decreased. Now there was lots of sitting around, packing and repacking supplies, reviewing their training manuals, and wishing for home. "Hey, Doc, what's happening today? Do I get out of here?" One of the patients from across the room called. "Am I going home soon?" They knew that this was part of the evacuation, not sending them back to the front line. "I guess his drugs wore off," JT said, and he got up to give another dose for pain. "Everything's quiet right now," he said to the patient. "Should be able to get you out of here anytime now, just as soon as there's a Jeep ready." "Heads up," called the sergeant as he entered the room quickly. "New orders. We're moving ASAP." "Oh, what now, Sarge? Are we finally going to head into Germany?" "Nope." Eisenhower wasn't paying attention to what's going on. The Germans have made a big move, heading west. They're running everything and everyone in the Ardennes forest. We leave by 1600 today. You know the routine, 3 hours, let's get out of here. Thus began an uncertain, intense, and very strenuous 10 days for JT, Edward, the company, and a lot of troops in that part of the world. In what would soon be called the Battle of the Bulge, everything was turned upside down. No one had expected the attack, and it was cold, incredibly cold. Snow and clouds day in, day out. It was reported that it was the coldest winter on record, or at least the last 10 years, and everyone suffered. After the sergeant's orders, JT's division did a remarkable move. They did a 180-degree turn, traveled almost 75 miles. Doesn't sound like much until you realize tanks only went about 3 or 4 miles an hour across some of that. 75 miles in the next 4 days, often going overnight, leaving late afternoon, driving all night, setting up a new bivouac in the morning, and then by afternoon moving again. They were exhausted, but they always had to set up the clearing company. They always had to be there in order to get the troops back home. That was their job. Those who were injured, keep them alive, and they were being very successful at it. As Christmas got closer, their orders as part of the whole division were to protect the southeastern flank, make sure the enemy didn't break through. They were about 20 miles from the actual front. The battles often were closer than that. There was bombing, there was strafing, there was artillery. The besieged city of Bastogne would become very famous, where a contingent of their division was about 40 miles, 20 miles on the other side of the front. The fighting and the cold, the snow and the casualties were constant. General Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, used all the troops at his disposal. He said in his order of December 22nd, "I call upon every man of the Allies to rise now to new heights of courage." The German commander didn't believe any of that. His troops were surrounding Bastogne. He demanded that the American troops there surrender. The US Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe simply replied, "Nuts." By Christmas Eve, JT and Edward were as exhausted as everyone else. They stood outside the surgical tent and looked up into the cloudy skies. The forecast was for the clouds to break by Christmas Day. That way, much needed supplies could be dropped. Also, the American bombers could come in and take care of the enemy. "Well, Edward," JT said with no more than a touch of sarcasm, "this sure isn't Berlin yet." "Huh, if only," Edward responded. It was unusually silent for the next few minutes. Both men were lost in their memories of the last Christmas they had known, a Christmas without war. It had been a while. "I used to sit in church with my whole family on Christmas Eve," said Edward. "The preacher would read from the Bible about how what God wanted was to have all of us get rid of the weapons and live in peace. You know the passage, JT?" JT nodded. "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks." "Yeah," Edward said. "And they won't learn war anymore." We sure keep messing that up. So here we are today, at the beginning of a season of hope and peace and light and life. Some will tell us, and there seems to be some reason to hope, that in many parts of the world, we may be closer to that hoped for peace than we think. Others will tell us, just look around. See the hatred and the anger and the war in many places, especially in our own hearts, and then brush us off as dreamers, as crazy. They may be right. It is a crazy wish. Peace, learning war no more. Like that thief in the night that Jesus talked about, like the unexpected attack of the Ardennes forest in 1944, there always seems to be something there that pulls us away from that hoped-for reality of learning war no more. We are good at looking back and saying, oh, if I had only known, I would have been ready. But Jesus reminds us again today that we need to be ready, always to see the vision of God as a real vision, as real as any other. We can be prepared to stand for peace and hope, not ignoring the reality of the world, but knowing that there is another reality and we're called to be a part of it. We are invited to walk in God's vision. Edward and JT stared off into the darkness for a while. I've been thinking about it, JT finally said. Maybe that's part of what we are about, you and me. We're bringing some small amount of life and hope into this seemingly God-forsaken place. Sure, Edward muttered. The cold has finally gotten to your brain. No, listen. Neither of us has any weapons. We're not allowed to. Here we are giving meds, bandaging wounds, helping these guys get out of here alive. And we do a good job of it. In the midst of war, we bring a little bit of peace. Yeah. And when we're with the frontline units, most of what we do is patch them up and send them back. Big help we are. No big celebrations for us, some peace. Listen, Edward, even here, we are peacekeepers. We don't fight. Oh, we would if we had to, but we keep hoping and healing as best we can. We save life, Edward. And we're coming up with more and more and better ways to do that every day. We give what we can. I saw you with that guy from Ohio the other day, the soldier we lost. You sat with him as long as you could. We had no chaplain nearby to do it, so you did it. Don't let anyone hear you talk like this, Edward smiled. It's going to ruin our hard-earned reputation. Maybe just because it's Christmas Eve. Hey, look, there's a star. Maybe it's clearing. The skies did clear. The help and supplies arrived. 2 days after Christmas, their division was relieved, moved back south. There they needed to regroup, retrain, and bring in lots of replacements. Officially, the Battle of the Bulge took another 2 weeks, and the war 3 more months. But on that Christmas of 1944, many never forgot what happened. Somehow or another, JT held on to his memories. After what I've already seen here, he said to Edward, I know that I'll never forget the destruction and all this. I will also never forget that when we could, we helped make life possible. Even here, I wish I could do that more often. JT, Edward said, I have a hunch you probably will. Someday someone may tell a story about us. They'll remember that we were here. Maybe not by name, but the giving of life when surrounded by loss and sadness. Life can go on. In this Advent season, listen to the words of Isaiah, and may we all learn to walk anew in the light of the Lord.